So, um, think about those animals that just, instantly grab your attention. The real icons.
Yeah,
For a lot of people, the snow leopard, that really elusive cat from the high mountains, it's definitely one of them.
for sure. Super charismatic.
But there's another amazing predator up there in the same landscapes, the Himalayas. The Himalayan wolf.
That's right. Often overlooked, perhaps.
Exactly. And today, we're going to do a deep dive into how these two big carnivores, and by carnivore, we just mean meat-eating animals, how they manage to live alongside or sometimes, well, clash with the people who've called those mountains home for generations, specifically in Nepal.
Hmm.
It's a chance to really get into this complex situation.
Yeah, and we're drawing on some really interesting research here, specifically a study that involved talking to 71 residents doing these questionnaire surveys.
Okay.
This is between 2014 and 2016 in places like Upper Humla, Upper Dulpa, and the Kanchenjunga Conservation Area. People often call it the KCA. And the whole point was to understand what these local people knew, how they felt about these animals, their perceptions, and what their actual interactions were like with both the wolf and the snow leopard.
Okay, so just to make sure we're all on the same page, especially if you're kind of new to conservation topics, let's quickly clarify a couple of terms.
Good idea.
We said carnivores, meat eaters. You'll also hear us talk about depredation. Now, that sounds a bit technical, but it's just when wild animals attack and kill livestock.
Things like yaks, goats, sheep, the animals people rely on.
Exactly. And we'll also mention agropastoralists. That term just describes people whose way of life combines farming with raising livestock.
So you might be thinking, okay, this is happening way up in the Himalayas. Why is this important for, the general public? Why should someone listening care?
Good question.
Well, the thing is, the health of whole ecosystems, like globally, often depends on having these top predators around. Animals like wolves and snow leopards, they play this really vital role in keeping things balanced.
How so?
Well, their presence affects the populations of the animals they hunt, which in turn affects the plants, the vegetation. It's all connected. Understanding the challenges these communities face living alongside them is also really key if we want to find conservation solutions that actually work for the wildlife and for the people.
Right. Solutions that stick.
Okay.
Okay, so let's focus on the main players here. The Himalayan wolf and the snow leopard. Both top predators, apex predators, in this incredible high-altitude region, the Nepalese Himalayas, the Qinghai Tibetan Plateau.
Yeah, ecologically, they're both super important. By keeping grazing animal populations in check, they influence the whole plant community. There's even some thought they help with nutrient cycling, through leftover kills supporting scavengers.
And tourism, too, I guess. People want to see these animals.
Potentially, yes. They're definitely charismatic species. If it's managed well, sustainably, tourism can bring real economic benefits to local people.
Okay, but here's something the study really brought out. Historically, conservation efforts in Nepal, they've really focused on the snow leopard, right?
That's a crucial point, yeah. The snow leopard has definitely been in the spotlight much more than the Himalayan wolf.
And that seems to have had a real impact on how local people actually view these animals.
Absolutely. That historical focus, maybe you could even call it a bias, it really showed up in the attitudes the study found. Overall, people surveyed had significantly more positive feelings towards snow leopards compared to wolves.
Wow, significantly more positive. And the main reason for the negativity towards wolves was what we were talking about earlier?
Yep. It really boiled down to livestock depredation, those attacks on their animals. The study found that was the single biggest predictor of negative feelings about wolves. If people experienced livestock loss to wolves, they tended to have a negative attitude.
But here's the really interesting part, for me anyway. Losing livestock to snow leopards didn't seem to have the same strong negative effect on attitudes towards them. Is that right?
That's exactly what the study found, statistically speaking. Livestock depredation by snow leopards didn't have a statistically significant impact on attitudes towards snow leopards in this particular research.
Huh. So why the difference?
Well, it suggests other things are potentially overriding that direct economic loss when it comes to snow leopards. Things like maybe their cultural importance or all those years of conservation focus we mentioned. It's a really key difference.
The study also found differences within the communities, didn't it? Like based on people's jobs.
It did. The agropastoralists, remember, those are the folks directly involved in farming and raising livestock. They generally had more negative attitudes towards both carnivores compared to people with other jobs, like teachers or business owners or monks.
Which makes sense, I suppose. Their livelihood is directly on the line.
Exactly. They're the ones feeling the direct financial hit when an animal is lost. Another interesting finding was that men generally had more positive views towards both wolves and snow leopards compared to women.
Any idea why that might be?
The study suggests it could be related to different roles in the community. Maybe men are more involved in herding out in the pastures, or perhaps they've had more exposure to conservation projects or discussions. It's hard to say for sure from this data alone, but it's an interesting pattern.
And location mattered too, right? You mentioned the KCA earlier.
Yes, absolutely. People in the Kanchenjunga Conservation Area, the KCA, which is notably community-owned and managed, showed the most positive attitudes towards both wolves and snow leopards, more positive than in Upper Humla, which isn't a protected area, and Upper Dolpa, which is partly inside a national park.
Okay, so that begs the question, why these differences? Why more tolerance for snow leopards generally? And why are people in the KCA seemingly more positive overall? Let's start with the snow leopard's popularity, for want of a better word.
Right. The study points to a few interconnected factors. Firstly, decades of conservation work, awareness campaigns. They've really put the snow leopard front and center.
Yeah, it's the poster child for Himalayan conservation almost.
Pretty much. And that spotlight often comes with financial support. Incentives tied directly to snow leopard conservation. That can definitely influence attitudes.
Money talks, basically.
To some extent, yeah. But there's also this really deep cultural and religious significance, especially linked to Tibetan Buddhism.
Oh,
People shared stories passed down through generations, connecting snow leopards to sacred mountains, to spiritual figures. There's this reverence. You even hear tales of monks being able to disguise themselves as snow leopards. That creates a powerful respect that might outweigh the occasional loss of livestock.
wow, that's powerful. So it's culture, conservation focus, maybe financial incentives, anything else?
Well, there's also just the nature of the animal itself. Snow leopards are incredibly elusive. They're mainly active around dawn and dusk, crepuscular.
Meaning people just don't see them very often?
Exactly. So maybe there's a bit of an out of sight, out of mind effect going on there too. Less direct encounters probably means less opportunity for negative feelings to build up.
Okay, that paints a clearer picture for the snow leopard. Conservation star, culturally important, rarely seen. Now, let's flip to the wolves. Why the more negative take there?
It seems to stem from a different set of things. For starters, in many cultures, including around there, folklore often portrays wolves negatively. You know, the classic big bad wolf kind of narrative.
Sure, those stories are everywhere.
And unlike the snow leopard, wolves might just be encountered more often. They can be active during the day, they live in packs, which are more visible, people hear them howling.
And they probably find evidence of them more easily, like around dens.
Right, den sites often have prey remains, so all that creates a stronger sense of their presence and potentially a stronger perception of threat, especially if livestock are being taken.
That makes sense. More visible presence, more potential for conflict to feel immediate.
Yeah. And then there's the global conservation picture. The gray wolf, which includes the Himalayan wolf, is listed as least concern by the IUCN. That's the big international body assessing extinction risk.
Okay.
Whereas the snow leopard is listed as vulnerable. That difference in perceived global threat level might also influence where conservation funding and attention goes. Less perceived urgency for the wolf, perhaps.
And you mentioned something about goats.
Yes, the study flagged a potential issue. There might be a shift happening in some areas towards raising smaller, possibly more vulnerable cashmere goats. If that's the case, it could unfortunately lead to more conflict with wolves, as they might be easier targets.
So it really feels like the absolute core of all this is that human-carnivore conflict, specifically the impact on people's livelihoods.
That is absolutely central for these pastoral communities who are often, economically marginalized to begin with. Losing livestock isn't just a small thing, it's a major economic blow.
Especially, you mentioned things are shifting away from just subsistence.
Exactly. There's a move towards more commercial farming and animal raising. That means each animal lost represents a bigger financial loss than it might have in the past. It really ups the stakes.
And the way they manage livestock traditionally, that can sometimes make things worse, like letting animals roam freely.
Yes, some traditional practices, like letting yaks and horses range freely over large areas without constant supervision, can definitely make them more vulnerable to attacks. The study actually tried to quantify the monetary loss.
Oh, really? What'd they find?
Well, interestingly, the reported average annual loss per household was highest in the KCA, then Dolpa, then Humla. When you compare these figures to the average income in Nepal, you see it can be a really significant hit for these families.
That's a big impact.
It is. Though it's important to add, the researchers noted these reported losses might sometimes be overestimated.
How come?
Several reasons possible. Maybe misidentifying the predator, or attributing a death from disease or an accident to a predator, or potentially in areas like the KCA where there might be compensation schemes, there could be some incentive to exaggerate losses slightly. It's complex to get precise numbers.
Right. Which just highlights again how vital it is to understand the local viewpoint and the economic realities they're dealing with when looking for solutions. So, what are people actually doing now to try and protect their animals?
Well, the study mentioned a few things. Herders actively guarding their livestock themselves is one method. Using guard dogs came up too, and that seemed more common in the KCA.
Okay.
And keeping animals in corrals, especially at night, protected enclosures. That's a key strategy across the board.
And did people have ideas about what works best or what could be improved?
They did. When asked what they thought was most important, two things really stood out. Having a herder actively watching the animals and using those secure corrals.
Makes sense. Eyes on the animals and physical barriers.
Exactly. And they had suggestions for improvements too. Things like enclosing the corrals with nets, building higher, stronger walls, maybe using deterrents like flashing lights or sirens, even playing recorded human voices to try and scare predators away.
So they're thinking proactively. But what did they say they needed to really commit to living alongside these carnivores?
This was really crucial. They basically highlighted two prerequisites, two essential things. First, access to construction materials to build those better, stronger, predator-proof corrals.
Okay, practical help.
Yes. And second, receiving compensation for livestock losses that actually covers the total value of the animal lost. Not just partial compensation, but something that makes them whole financially.
That feels fair, doesn't it? If you're asking people to bear the cost of conservation, essentially, they need the tools and a proper safety net.
Precisely. And this loops back to why just focusing conservation efforts on the snow leopard isn't ideal for the whole ecosystem's health.
Right, you need to consider all the players.
Exactly. For long-term success, conservation needs to look at the whole predator guild, which absolutely includes wolves. And the KCA, that community-run area, seems like a potentially useful model here.
Because they had the most positive attitudes.
Yeah. Yes, and the study links that partly to their community-based livestock insurance scheme and their conservation awareness programs. What's really telling is that wolves naturally recolonized the KCA area, and the community's willingness to protect them was tied directly to getting wolves included in that insurance scheme.
So it's about including all the relevant carnivores in the support systems.
It strongly suggests that, yes. Extending damage relief payments to cover losses from all carnivores seems critical. And interestingly, the legal basis for this apparently already exists in Nepal, but it needs consistent implementation on the ground.
So the policy is there, but maybe not the practice everywhere yet.
Seems like it. The researchers also point out that alongside financial help, there needs to be a focus on promoting better livestock vigilance from owners and herders, too. It can't just be about payments. Responsible management is also key.
So, like a shared responsibility.
Yeah, maybe an integrated system, incentives for good practices, maybe disincentives for clear negligence. But ultimately, it has to involve real participatory engagement, empowering the local communities, making them partners, and building pride in coexisting with these animals.
So, looking ahead then, what does genuine, sustainable coexistence look like in a place like this?
Well, it involves several pieces. One big one is ensuring the carnivores have enough of their natural wild prey available. If wild prey populations are healthy, predators are less likely to target livestock.
Reduce the temptation, basically.
Right. And it also means recognizing that conservation isn't separate from other aspects of life there. It's tied into social dynamics, agriculture, traditional grazing patterns. It's all connected.
So no easy single answer.
Definitely not. The bottom line seems to be needing these integrated, multi-species conservation plans that are developed with and genuinely respect the local communities. That seems to be the path towards fostering real long-term coexistence.
Okay, so wrapping up this deep dive, what we've really unpacked is this incredibly complex picture in the Himalayas. It's this mix of local attitudes, real economic pressures, deep cultural beliefs, and conservation actions, all shaping how people and these major carnivores interact.
Yeah, and that clear difference in attitudes, more positive towards snow leopards, more negative towards wolves, really stands out.
And the key driver for that negativity towards wolves seems pretty clearly linked to livestock depredation, the economic cost.
Absolutely. Which leads us to a final thought, something for you, the listener, to maybe mull over.
Okay.
Given how connected ecosystems are and how crucial understanding local perspectives is, how can we design conservation